Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hands-On Logos podcast. This is where we discuss current events, personal growth, and any other random topic that crosses our minds. Our goal is to have a meaningful discussion that help us to see the topics we discuss more clearly. Our hope is we can help you expand your self-awareness, develop your critical thinking, and learn to be less reactive to the world around you. And most importantly, remember, be curious. If you like what you hear, like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any feedback, please leave a comment. We want to hear what you think. We appreciate you. All right, everybody. This is podcast, I don't know what it is. Is this episode 13, Chris?
I think it is, yeah.
Holy, and again, it's Friday, and we have a special guest on today, Mike Wyatt. And Mike, if you could just take a couple minutes, maybe you could just introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure. I recently retired about a year and a half ago. I was 69, spent the final 30 years in industrial sales. Before that, I was into mechanical engineering. I never finished my degree, but I worked in a vast variety of industries, from material handling to conveyors to warehousing, and ended up in flexible metal hose. So that touches a lot of different segments along the way, because each of those is a piece of some part of bigger puzzle someplace. And met fascinating people from all over the world at trade shows and doing projects and things like that. And it was quite rewarding, but I am enjoying retirement now. And a little bit of life of leisure down here in Arkansas. Chris, I'd lived not too far from where, excuse me, where Scott is now. We are exercise buddies at the local gym.
Cool. Yeah. So basically what we do, Chris, is there's a little room upstairs, and we hang out with the old ladies in chairs, and we just go through that. And the reason I started that class is I couldn't exercise because my foot was goofed up. And but it is surprising. I mean, you get a pretty darn good workout in a chair, you know. So I'm wouldn't have expected that. I come home sore almost every single class. So
YouTube advertises these chair workout apps or something that I've been seeing.
Yeah, it's you wouldn't expect it, but it's
it is, and it takes the pressure off the knees, because I have bad knees. That's the big thing for me. But it's a good aerobic workout, 45 minutes.
I have a bad knee too, and I keep pushing it because of that knees over toes guy. I don't know if you've watched him on YouTube. He has like a half reconstructed knee, and he got full mobility back over, but it took years to do. So I've got a bad knee. I'm like, usually I'll exercise, and then for the next 2 days I can barely walk. And then I'll exercise, and the next 2 days I can barely walk.
Oh, yeah.
Since I retired, I started taking yoga classes at a gym down here, and I take private lessons with a woman that has expanded that to being like almost a personal trainer. Mm-hmm. She's incorporated some Pilates with that and some other stretching and things. And I have two bad knees for all the years of sports I played, a bad right hip and a bad right shoulder. She has taken away all the joint pain. I am more flexible than I've been in decades, and I feel much better, because it's also calmed my mind down.
Yeah. Yoga is amazing. I don't know if you've done yoga or not, Chris, but I've done, and when I say this, I'm not exaggerating. I've done probably over 1,000 yoga classes long time ago. And it is, I don't know what to describe it as. It's like a miracle. It's like magic, but it's just really slow. So it's sort of not an American thing.
I've fallen asleep in almost every yoga class I've ever done, because at the end we would always do that corpse pose where you kind of fully relax.
Shavasana,
I'll be snoring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's okay. That's exactly what it's for.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I now I'm getting inspired. I need to probably go back and do some yoga, because it's just oh boy, it's like a miracle, so pretty cool.
I was at a Chamber of Commerce meeting on Wednesday, so I'm trying to go out and interact more, network more, and I met this guy. He's 70 years old, really tan skin, kind of reminds me of, who was the actor? Hamilton, the dark skinned guy. Gosh, I'm trying to
Oh,
something other Hamilton.
uh,
Anyway,
yeah.
yeah, and this guy, he's an anti-aging. He's an anti-aging protagonist promoter, or I thought he said anti-Asian when he first said it. But we were talking, and he and the other guy I was talking to, they were going on about peptides and all these things for your body, and they mentioned one called BPC 157, which they have pills or creams, but they also have an injection that you put at a site, and it helps muscle repair. So the guy had like a problem with his shoulder, his cuff, and they were able to
Oh,
heal faster and better. But they say because it enhances growth, you don't want to take it all the time because that means it'll enhance like bad growth too, like cancer.
oh,
So
wow.
you always want it localized and not every day. You want it on a set schedule. So, but
Yeah.
I've never heard of this before, so I was looking into that, and I was watching a lot of that this week. There are a whole bunch of peptides out there that do all kinds of things to kind of hack the body. It's
Yeah.
things that your body already does, but it's like, supercharging or making it start faster.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Interesting.
we're gonna have amazing advances in medicine. One of my clients is in regenerative medicine, does a lot of like laser stem cell injections.
Mhm.
And I'm telling you, I've talked to some of the before and afters, and it is like basically like a miracle, like what happens. I mean, he only takes the toughest cases. He's like right before you come in for knee surgery, that's when you come to me, and it's a combination of laser, injection, magnetic therapy,
Stem cells?
stem cells. Yeah,
That
stem.
seems to be a common one now, stem cells. So,
Yeah, and another thing that I tried doing, but it didn't work on me when I was in California, is something called EBOO, which is like where they basically it's like a dialysis machine. They put what do you call it? Needles in both your arms, and they run your blood through this filtering thing, and then run it through all these different kinds of lights and filters, and it's supposed to do magical, stuff. So I know there's so many awesome, advances. The problem is none of this stuff's covered by insurance. This is when you start
Yeah.
doing this stuff, you're in a cash only game at this point.
so have we talked about fecal matter transplants?
We haven't talked about it, but I know a little bit about it actually. Yeah,
Right. So
for
the
your
idea
gut
that
biome. Yeah.
someone who's extremely healthy, athletic, whatever, has a gut biome that we should all want.
Yeah,
And so you
right.
take a little poop from them and you put it in you, and now you've got their gut biome. And apparently it's common in other countries and even covered by insurance in a lot of countries. But here it's like a last ditch for people with real gastric problems that they do it for. But this one company has started to make pills. So you're actually eating poop,
Oh,
and
that's fascinating.
they put it in a capsule form so it bypasses the stomach. It gets through the stomach, it doesn't get eaten up, and then it
It's
gets
like a
into your
coated or
intestines where it
something
needs
on
to
it, so it
be.
goes through. Yeah.
But they're saying their next step is to go find like Olympic athletes and get their biome, and specific. Imagine you could get specific famous people's gut biome in a pill.
Yeah, this is like crazy
Interesting.
stuff, actually. I'm going to start working on that because for the past year, I've had so many antibiotics, which has probably just wiped out my gut biome and everything.
Oh yeah,
So I'm trying to do it the old-fashioned way, apparently through eating fermented foods and sauerkraut.
fermented foods, prebiotic foods,
Yeah,
artichoke, all the garlic, any of the root vegetables like that. Yeah,
yeah.
I like I was drinking probiotic water.
Oh, interesting.
You just take water, put a little honey in it, and I took one of those probiotic capsules that I take. I just dumped it into the thing and mixed it, and it begins to bubble, and you get a little bit of effervescence, and it smells a
Oh.
little sour, kind of like fermented. But it's figuring as many ways to get the probiotics into my body as possible. I don't know if it really helped, but it made me feel like it was helping.
Yeah, and I don't really know anything, so that never stops me from talking about stuff I know absolutely nothing about.
We're
Like
Americans; we can have an opinion on anything.
exactly, even with zero facts, zero data. Exactly, but there was this new cancer test I just took. It's cash only. It's like $1,000 to do it. It's like calorie or something like that. And
Hmm.
so apparently they draw just a little bit of blood, and they can actually look for DNA fragments of various kinds of cancer that happen way before it actually happens. And it comes back with like they've tested for 50 different kinds of cancer. So it's sort of there's some cool stuff going on, in regenerative.
There's that guy we always talk about, Thomas DeLauer or
Oh
whatever.
yeah,
I guess his
yeah,
doctor is based out of Kansas City. So what, 4 hours or so from where you guys are?
Yeah, roughly.
yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, if it, and that's more of it's concierge medicine, right? Because none of this stuff's covered under insurance.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
was thinking, if you want to find any of that kind of stuff, there's people around.
Yeah, there's people around. It's interesting. I know when I first came here, I have a concierge doctor, same as Dr. Sills. It's kind of cool. And you pay like 2 grand a year. And he gives you his phone number, and it's just you have plenty of time with him because he can take less patients. He's
Hmm.
probably the best doctor I've ever had before because he'll actually sit there for 45 minutes and just listen to you, not like a standard doctor. You're in and out in what, like 6 minutes or something. He stops listening after 30 seconds. He's like, go away because I've got 50 other patients to see today.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know where that's going. So anyway, so what are we gonna talk about today?
What have we been talking about? What do you want to talk about today?
Well, we're gonna have Shelly, my wife, coming on to talk about frameworks,
Okay.
which Mike, are you familiar with frameworks?
No, what is frameworks?
Well, it's sort of like a mental model that
Okay.
simplifies reality. So you create a structure or sort of a framework of a way to think. And,
Okay.
maybe we'll let Shelly talk. She's going to pop in probably in about 20 minutes or so, just for about half an hour. But she's going to talk because I know one of the things, the point of this channel, Mike, or one of the points of the channel, is to have a little more logic and critical thinking, a little less emotion, a little more logic.
Okay.
And
Yep.
so a framework is a way to help analyze complicated things quickly and simply. Like just a really quick example that I could give is
Hmm.
something called Ohm's law, if you're familiar with that. In school, it's like twinkle, twinkle, little star equals I times R. It's relationships between voltage and current and
Oh,
resistance.
yes.
And it all
Yeah.
is really developed from this complex thing called Maxwell's equations that can solve all these problems, but they're just hard and they're difficult, a lot of differential calculus involved. So what they've
Okay.
done is they've done something called lumped matter distribution, or basically put this into a framework. So now you can analyze very complicated things as long as your components are within this box. We also talk about
Parameters. Okay.
constraints, how we put constraints around things. Then we can
Hmm.
simplify and turn it into just very simple, just multiplication and division. But yet the answer is still good as long as you don't go out of your box. If you go out of your box, then you need to start using more complicated tools. But
Yes.
it's surprising, like if somebody takes the time to develop a framework, how powerful it can be and how quickly you can respond. And basically, it makes you look and act like a lot smarter than you actually are, which is kind of
So
really cool.
I've got what I think is a simpler answer of what a framework is.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah,
It's a method.
it's a method.
And I
Yeah.
and I say that with the idea that if you think about this, you are given a task to do that you have no idea what to do.
Yeah, right.
What's the first thing you do? What's the next thing you do? And then tomorrow you're given another task you've never done before. What's the first thing you do? What's the next thing you do? More than likely, you're going to follow the same pattern that you go through. You're not going to approach it totally differently than you did before. Something new, I don't know what to do. Start with research, start on the internet, start with YouTube. I'm going to have some method I use. So, all of these steps that you do actually reflect a method or a framework
Hmm.
that you approach to all of this. A lot of your frameworks you probably learned from your parents or from school, and they didn't call it a framework. They just had a way for you to approach things. So I think a lot of people have frameworks that they use. They just don't know what that they're called. That we're calling them frameworks. Because the idea here is when you examine what it is you do and you go, well, what is the first thing I do? Well, I go to YouTube. But yeah, what are you really doing? Well, I'm researching, right? Oh, so your first step is to research. Usually it's understand the problem, understand the question,
Yeah.
research it, find a solution, analyze the solutions, make a choice, right? All those types of things, the critical thinking steps. But the idea here is so many people get upset. They have an emotional reaction. What I heard today was called a biological response to a situation,
Okay.
and
Emotional
they don't.
reaction. Yeah.
And then their mind goes into that mode and doesn't go into this critical thinking thought process which would
Hmm.
get them a better result. We think would get them a better
Yep.
result. Our opinion is, in general, a critical thinking result is better than an emotional result.
Yep. I did that for years. I was in the material handling industry and did all sorts of warehousing conveyors and combination. Somebody would come and give me an empty building, tell me what they wanted to do, give me the data, and I was able to go back, design a system, get all the components, put together a proposal, and hopefully sell it to them. then you implemented project management, everything through completion, and being a commissioned salesperson for a long time, then you get paid.
Yeah.
So it's the same concept.
Yeah,
And then
well,
you have to be able to take that and flip it and explain it to the people on a basic level so they can utilize all that stuff quickly to make it efficient.
well, project management, I mean, we've got the frameworks, right? The
Yep.
PMI and Prince and all these different frameworks that are out there. The idea is someone sat down and said, here's some good general rules to follow, some principles to follow, and they built this method, this framework. So, and over time, you refine it and you start building different nuances to your framework, right? This
Mm-hmm.
framework is for this situation. This framework, or what Scott and I was talking about is mindset, right? If
Yep.
my critical thinking when I'm in the mindset of a dad is different than when I'm in the mindset of someone out in the garden gardening, right? I got
Yeah.
totally different value structures in place. So, how I reason actually does get impacted by the mindset I'm in.
And
Hmm.
you learn something from every framework that you successfully complete, and you modify it consistently as you go through life.
Yeah,
Mm.
Okay. I'm going to push back on this a little bit, actually,
of
Okay.
course.
because that's just what we do, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be any fun.
That's all
So
we learn.
I kind of agree with you, but it sounds to me more like what you're talking about as a process or a checklist. And I'm just in my mind, a framework is just is a little different than that in some way. Um,
Okay. How?
I knew you were going to ask that.
I won't call it a process. A checklist is pretty close, but to me, a
Mhm.
process is the specific scenario requires me to do this for the framework. I take this framework in this scenario, the process is in the middle. That's to me the process. When you go back to the framework, there's guiding, I'll call them steps, which makes it sound like a checklist flow, but there's some guiding things you're going to do. When you're trying to figure out a problem, you need to understand the problem. The order might not even be exact, but usually it makes sense to figure out what the problem is, then understand it better, research it, understand possible solutions, somehow analyze and rate those solutions as what's the best or what's the most likely or what's the cheapest, whatever scenario you're using, and then make a decision. And then usually there's a sixth step, which always everyone forgets, is to act on it. But that's
Mm.
So, I mean, I can kind of get that. I mean, I'm not totally with you, and I'm not totally against you. So it sounds to me like it's a way to think about something. Is
Yeah.
that
Guiding
what you're saying?
principles. How's that? Guiding principles to solve your project or your task, and you get specific because
principles.
every task is different.
Yeah, I think to me, those principles are again in the middle between the situation you're trying to solve and the framework, and there's all this stuff in the middle that's the actual doing of it, right? Actually taking the
Mm.
steps to do it. And I think the principles impact that, right? If my principle is I'm not going to hurt any, I will never take an action that hurts anyone, then all my process steps will be such that that's a consideration, right?
Yep.
I don't know if that's necessarily part of the framework. That's more of a constraint. So we're going back to other words we like to use, constraints.
Okay.
Scott and I now think that constraints are the most powerful thing because they actually spark you to be more innovative and imaginative to figure things out. Because now I know what my limits are.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I did a whole speech in Toastmasters that the idea of thinking outside the box is not the goal. Because if you think outside the box, you just get some random thought. It may be creative as hell, but it's just a random thought. The real thing is to build a box, your constraints, and then to understand the limits of that box and to be creative within that box in a way no one else ever has been. So I actually think you just need a bigger box.
There you go. That's a way to look at it.
You always need a bigger box. Yeah, that's so
But
interesting.
in your scenario, if you don't want to harm somebody, and that may be a little subjective, because what harms one group of people or a single person benefits other groups of people or individuals. So, harm is kind of a
Well, that's a
subjective word.
secondary. That's a secondary value, right? How much harm is it
Okay.
okay in order to help someone else? Is it okay to kill someone to save 10? Or is it
That
okay to break an arm to save a person? I mean,
right. They get into all those value judgments. Yes, I agree.
So I was watching a YouTube video yesterday about not critical thinking. What did they call it? Higher order thinking.
Higher order thinking. What
Right?
does
But it was
that
basically
mean?
just critical thinking. And I guess there is um, a way of thinking of different levels of thinking when it comes to like schoolwork. But it applies to most of these scenarios. The idea is
Oh, is it that like the 5 levels you're talking about?
6 levels. Yeah.
6 levels. I think I may have saw that a
Yeah.
while
So
ago.
the first level is remembering things, just knowledge,
Yeah.
having knowledge and being able to recall it. That's all it is. The next level is to comprehend, to understand what it is that you've now learned. The third level is to apply it, to understand the context, to be able to use it in some manner. The next level is to analyze it, to be able to take it apart, understand the pieces, how they fit together, and the impact they have. Then comes the ability to synthesize it, to actually change things around, because
Yeah.
now you
Right.
understand how the pieces work and change the outcome. And then the last level is, well, in the sixth level model, the last level is to evaluate it, to look at it and really understand it, to be able to explain it, to make a judgment call, to be able to say this is a good thing or a bad thing. And then there's a seventh level one guy has, which is to be able to be creative on that. But what occurred to me is we talk about there's a lot of work to get to the level where you have an opinion. The evaluation, step 6. I have to know things. I have to understand them. I have to be able to apply them. I have to be able to analyze them. All that stuff is there. So when I have an opinion, I've got all this stuff that I've done or should have done in the background.
Mhm.
But when we go to most people today, particularly when we are on the far left or the far right, and we're arguing all the time, they have their right to their evaluation, their opinion, with none of that homework they've done in the background. So I
Yeah.
was thinking, you have a right to your opinion. You're an American. Where we live here, you can have any opinion you want, but you haven't earned it in my mind. You haven't earned your opinion. If
I
you
would
haven't,
agree.
if you haven't done all that pre-work, which is why it's like I don't want to do that work, so I will talk to this person over here who represents something. They've done the homework, and so by proxy, I've done the homework. But that's like, no, it's not true.
No.
Okay, hang on, Chris. What is that? Okay, those 6 or 5 or 7 steps you just talked about, what do
Yeah,
you call that? Is that a process or are you calling that a framework?
they're classifications of thinking is what they call it. So they're actually levels of thinking.
But is that in a framework? Is it a process or is it something totally different?
This is not related to that. So
So it's unrelated. Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
I think so. This is kind of where I think we were talking about in the last couple episodes going through is we need to take a scenario, talk through the process we would go through to apply critical thinking, and do that 3 or 4 times till we get to a point where we see a standardization, something that's similar across all those scenarios. Then we can start to figure out what our framework is. Because I think the problem we have is we keep going to an example. Well, this example and that example. And it's like, well, then we're talking about steps you actually take, things you actually do to do that. And I'm like, is that the framework, or is that just how you've applied the framework to the scenario? So I think we kind of have to backwards engineer. We start with give us something that triggers us, work backward from it, how we're going to critically think through it, do that a dozen times, and then we say, yo, first thing we did, we got rid of the emotion. We took a break. We counted to 10, whatever it is that you did to break away from that emotion.
Would one of the steps then being knowing that you don't know and going out and doing the research?
I think so. I'm now a little more convinced. Well, I want us to build common sense instead of critical thinking. I
Yes.
think critical thinking is a skill of common sense, but common sense has to do with knowledge and experience,
Yeah.
right? You
Okay.
have to have a framework of knowledge. You have to have a background of information to draw upon, and that is and apply and that with your critical thinking makes you very powerful, right? If you have critical thinking but you have no experience of the world, no knowledge, then you really can't contextualize how this scenario fits, right? If the
Yes.
thing that's setting
Yes.
you off is somebody insulted you, but you've got no experience of being insulted, how are you going to
I
put
do.
that into any kind of context?
Hmm. I get it.
Yeah. And I think this is why, elders in society were respected. They didn't have to be very smart, intelligent. But they were wise, and the wisdom gave them the ability to be knowledgeable and to have that common sense.
Yeah.
And if you're If you're smart, you can shortcut that a little bit, but it doesn't replace it. So if you can get someone who's intelligent and wise and knows how to think critically without getting too emotional or letting other factors get in the way, you got a really powerful thinker.
So let me
Yeah.
ask a question. Is it that they're just smart, or is it that they're just very observant and they just recognizing patterns? They'll say, "Oh, I see this, I see this, I see this. Therefore, this is probably going to be it."
Now we have to start defining things like smart. What do we mean by smart?
Yes. Yeah.
Right? There's different kinds of intelligence, right?
There
That
is.
there is.
You know, I just see there's book learning, there's social understanding social relationships, right?
Hmm.
I mean, someone who can manipulate someone might be very socially intelligent and understand how people think.
Mhm.
You know, someone who's very book learned might have a lot of facts, but having a lot of facts might mean you're only level one, knowledge and recall. You may not understand anything you read. You may not be able to apply anything you read. So you could be really smart in just knowing a lot of facts. You know, Trivial Pursuit. You know, I've got a lot of trivia in my head.
But
So level
yeah.
one, I'm an expert in level one. Level two, I'm pretty good, right? But as you go up the ladder, it's supposed to be harder.
Hmm.
And when you think about it, it takes more energy and it's harder to do for the brain to do those higher levels. So it's almost like if you compared someone who's a really good thinker, if that were their sport, they'd be like a top line athlete.
Hmm. It's good to know when to go out and ask other experts to gather information, and that increases your base knowledge. So the next time you have more base knowledge to act upon, and you may be able to go further before you have to go out and reach for help.
What's the theory or whatever it's called when someone, is it the Dunning-Kruger effect? The one where you think you're way too confident, you think you know it all. And the more you know, the less confidence you have because you would think the more you know, the more confidence you have. But the more you know, the less confidence you have because you realize you
Mhm.
just don't know stuff. And what I've always said, so I've been, basically a project manager for years. And I always say I'm a generalist, but I'm a specialized generalist. So I'm not that top level guy who's only this deep into a topic, right? But I'm not
Mhm.
your subject matter expert who's like this in a topic.
Right.
I'm in the middle somewhere. I'm deep enough to understand when you're talking to me the gist of what you're saying if you're an
Mhm.
SME.
Mhm.
I understand it enough to know that when something you're talking about is a problem, I can make the connection saying, "Oh, that's an IT problem. Oh, that's an HR problem. Oh, that's a legal
Mhm.
problem." And then I can go to the SME in that department, explain well enough for them to get the gist of it, that then they can talk and fix the problem, and
Mhm.
then things are fixed, right? We live in a world where everyone wants to be an SME and the companies want to hire the SMEs, but they don't think about the importance of the person who greases the wheels between all these SMEs.
A facilitator
Yes.
that makes people meet. One thing I did going into sales was sales gets such a bad connotation from a lot of people, and coming from a technical background of mechanical engineering, it took me a while to learn the people skills that
Hmm.
go with the sales thing. And after a while, doors would shut. I'm in sales. I went, no. So if people ask me what I did, I would say I meet people for a living. You get these crazy looks and they get, well, what do you mean? Well, that starts a conversation. And
Mhm.
that's basically what it did. It went out and met people,
Hmm.
you know, or the other thing was I help other companies be better at what they do. You identify a problem and help them solve it, etc. But that also opens a conversation where is I'm here to sell you something, bang, the phone goes down or the door gets slammed in your face. Just a different approach.
I got a question for you.
Sure.
Process improvement,
Yes.
continuous process improvement,
Yes.
operational excellence.
Yes.
They companies call them out. They all want this. They all talk about how important it is, and
Yes.
like it's a big science. And I'm like, I would think if you have a good operations team, you spend time doing this. This is just, and periodically your company re-engineers your processes and fixes things.
Absolutely.
And so the concept that it needs a separate expert, like sometimes maybe you do, but generally this concept that your ops teams don't have those skills already inherently there, it kind of makes me think, is that true?
Well, a lot of it depends on context. If you have a big manager, a C-level manager, okay, that understands to allow his team at all the different levels to have input and improve it through everybody's input and not be afraid to take the next step, you're fine. That works really well. If you have a high level manager that his worth to the company is what he knows, like he knows this one process better than anybody else, well, he hoards all the information. There's
Yeah,
no way you're going to get into the betterment of the process.
I've had
Well,
that boss.
The conclusion on that point is you have to replace the manager. And when you get to that level, then you're a threat. And many times they want to get rid of the person that brings that to the table.
Well, the idea of allowing people to fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a culture. It's an
Yes.
acceptance that failure is not a judgment on the person,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if the approach is such that they're trying to make things better and failure is just part of the process.
Yes.
But I really feel like that in bureaucracies, you're always afraid to fail. So you're always playing it safe and you always minimize the amount of work. And I think Scott and I have talked a lot about what's going on with the government and cutting everything. And I'm like, I don't think people purposely go out to do bad decision making. It's a matter of smaller scale, smaller scale. This is all I do. I'm not going to get in trouble, and
Yes.
I'm not going to fail. And it ends up no one owns anything. No one's accountable for anything. And if you're not accountable for it, you're not going to put in the effort to make sure it works right.
No, but being accountable is that getting rid of that person or maybe just reassigning them to something they're better at.
I feel there's a overall structural problem in the way processes are put in play. So
I
it's
would
it's
agree
almost
with that.
designed so no one's responsible.
Sorry.
Yes.
I,
No,
I,
no, you're right.
I want to interrupt just for a second. We have a new guest coming on the show. This is an all-time world record, two guests simultaneously on the Hands on Focus podcast. This is this is Shelly. So Shelly, welcome to the podcast. How's your day going?
Thank you. It's going great. Yeah, I'm the other half. I'm kind of bummed you interrupted the flow of that. I was enjoying where it was going.
We'll pick up a flow somewhere.
Well,
They all
we're
it
always
comes and
going
goes.
somewhere. So anyway, so we were talking about frameworks, Shelly. So I know
Oh
you've done a
yeah,
lot of framework work.
definition. We need a
And
definition.
and another thing that we'd love to argue here, right? Another thing we were arguing about or discussing, maybe I was arguing, maybe they were discussing.
Mhm.
What's the difference between a process and a framework? And maybe you could, before we start digging, maybe you could give a little bit of background and what you know about frameworks.
Well, it's interesting. You were just saying, well, what is a framework? And I never really thought about putting it into words. But now that you ask that, when I think about it, like I actually think of a picture frame. We've got all these great big life experiences, and how do you share all the details in a way that makes sense to somebody else? How do you tell the story? How do you tell it in a way that it's got clarity, that they can easily digest it? For people that are visual learners, how do they see it? So really frameworks is taking a big idea and putting a nice frame around it to add clarity and so that people can really understand what you're trying to share. And I found this so helpful because I think one of the hardest things for me is to convey ideas. Like I feel like it helped me go from like the word salad types of responses when people would ask me a question to be able to sound much more intelligent.
Okay, wait, hang on just a second. So you're talking
It's
about frameworks in a sense so you can organize information in a way that makes it easier for people to understand it.
Yeah.
Oh
it
my
seems
God.
like an outside in almost viewpoint the way you're thinking of it. And I've been thinking of a framework when we're talking about it as something from the inside out.
Yeah, like a way to think about something. But for your clients, though, they use the framework. You give them the framework so they can think about things in a different way. Is that can you example of a framework and like tell us what do you do and why do you make frameworks?
Well, I didn't even know what a framework was until Gosh, I'm trying to think. It was probably almost 3 years ago. I did a course with a gentleman by the name of Colin Boyd. He immigrated to the US from Australia, and his specialty is teaching people to sell from stage. And today, stages are very different. It's not just those platforms in front of a live audience. Today, Zoom is your stage for many of us. And I was putting together my program, and I also the my big thing in putting together my program, or putting together a new iteration of my
Wait, Shelly,
program.
back up just for a second. You gotta give us a little background. Like, what do you do? What's your program?
Okay. My program is Right Size Lifestyle Academy. It did not have that name before I started this Collins class I'm going to tell you about. But so I help women who are struggling with weight regain after having had weight loss surgery.
Oh,
And how I got into that is I myself had weight loss surgery. This April will be 23 years. I lost a whole person basically. I lost 100 pounds, and I had seen stories about people regaining weight here and there, but I was like, that's not going to happen to me. I've been through too much to let something like that happen. And you get this amazing tool, you drop weight like crazy. I dropped over 100 pounds in 6 months.
wow.
And, but within a year, I had a couple pounds start creeping back on. And
Mhm.
it wasn't a lot, probably not enough that anyone would notice. But that began getting back into that cycle of what do you do when you gain the weight after weight loss surgery? If you put on any weight, you only know the crap that didn't work before surgery, which was dieting. And guess what? Diets don't work after surgery either. So it took me a long time. It was an up and down of regain. I'd gain some, lose some, gain it back. And I eventually got to a point where I regained half of what I'd lost
Wow.
before I finally figured it out. And I figured out how to ditch the diet and how to truly make change to my environment, to my mindset, to my habits. And then I just kind of reverse engineered. How did I do that? And I put together a program to help other women who are struggling with the same thing I am. So that's what I do in a nutshell. And I had started dabbling around with a smaller program. My first program was bite-sized changes for right-sized living. And
Mm.
it was just very small. But it was my first foray into putting together content and meeting with clients and getting feedback. And based on that, I was like, I need to make a lot of changes to this and really get it to something I think is going to be more engaging for a wider audience. And that's when I started that program I was telling you about with Colin. How do I sell this stuff? Because a lot of times it's not the program, we just don't know how to sell it.
Hmm.
And he was the one who introduced me to frameworks as part of selling from stage. How do you sell the value that you're offering? And one of his tools was putting it into frameworks. And oh my gosh, my life is just, as a content creator, I am all about frameworks.
Okay. We have a network of people that supplement your concepts and stuff that you refer people to, such as physical fitness people or dietary people as part of the program.
No, at this point, it is really just it's me, and I focus on those three elements. I focus on the mindset, environment, and behavior.
Hmm, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about framework, Shelly. Now we kind of got your background. So
Okay.
tell us about a framework. And if you could you maybe show one or two frameworks and contrast it with here's the problem and then the framework and then here's after the framework.
Sure. And I'm trying to think. I have a couple. I'm trying to think. All right. So here's the one I'll show you first. So hang on, let me adjust my screen here. So this is one of the frameworks I did because one of the biggest problems people in my audience have is I make these changes and I can only stick to them for a couple days or a week or a month. And maybe some of you have experienced that. It might not have anything to do with it, lifestyle changes and dieting, or what I refer to as right-sized living for you. But I'm sure there's areas of your life where you can probably relate to that. How do you make changes stick? And so I, I wanted to come up with something to help people because that's one of the things I do. Part of my program is how do you make change that is sustainable? And I found that one of the best ways to do that is to pick the right change, because a lot of times part of the problem is we don't pick something to change that it's almost like it's doomed from the start. Like someone who says, like I get a lot of people who say, I'm going to eliminate sugar. I'm not going to eat sugar anymore. And I immediately, my jaw drops thinking, that might get you in a little bit of trouble. So I wanted to share with people, how do you pick the right change if you're going to make a change? So I thought about it long and hard, and it took me a while to figure out all the pieces. But once I figured out the pieces, it was so much easier to tell the story. And people get really excited about this when they've got a picture. The picture just helps them, it's more concrete, it makes more sense to them. So I tell people, I'm like, there's 3 components that are required to identify a change and that you can actually stick to. And the first one is motivation. So what I share with people is, let's say, for example, you've gotten into a habit where you're not having the healthiest breakfast. And for my audience, that might be maybe they're having half a donut, because we can usually only have smaller quantities and we have sugar limitations too without getting sick. But let's say someone's having a half a donut for breakfast. Do they have, number one, the motivation to make that change? Well, maybe they do. Maybe they feel sick when they eat it, and maybe it just makes them feel lethargic for the rest of the day. So they identify that as their motivation. And hey, maybe as a side benefit, the scale will go down a little bit. I'll drop some of the weight I've gained. So the next element is know-how. If you're going to make a change, do you have the information you need to actually execute that change? Now, for the example I gave of half a donut for breakfast, I tell the people I work with, I'm like, you probably know what a healthy breakfast is, but let's just say you didn't know what a nutritious breakfast is. You might hire a bariatric nutritionist to say, hey, what comprises a healthy breakfast? Like, what are the portions? How much protein should I be having? What types of foods should I gravitate to for a healthy breakfast? What should I stay away from? So you would get the know-how you need to execute the change. That's an important element. And if you see in my little diagram here between motivation and know-how, like, because when you have both motivation and you have know-how, then you have the clarity to do what you need to create change. And then the third element is willingness. And I find for my audience, this is often the biggest, this is often what they're missing to make the right changes. So willingness, you need to be willing to make the change. So that donut, are you willing to give up the donut? And sometimes there might even be something that lies under the surface, something unconscious that might take away your willingness to make a change. Like, for example, maybe when you were a kid, every time you went to grandma's for summer vacation, the 2 of you would go get donuts every morning for breakfast. And subconsciously, maybe giving up the donut is giving up those memories of grandma. So are you willing to make the change? So when you have know-how and you have willingness, then you're able to take the actions needed to create the change. And then you come full circle. When you have willingness and motivation, you will stay, you have what it takes to stay in compliance with that change. And it's so interesting, like just to give you a concrete example, this is when it starts making sense to the people you're working with. So I had one client, Lori, and she was one of my early clients, and her goal was she wanted to stop late night snacking. And she would sometimes make it a day, a couple days. If she's doing really good, she'd make it a week, but she'd always fall back into that late night snacking, like 11 o'clock at night or midnight. She would work into the night, and she would have chocolate as she watched TV to unwind late at night. And when it finally hit her that she didn't want to give up chocolate, she enjoyed it too much. That moment of time at the end of the day, she got too much out of it to give it up, at least at that point in her life. So she stopped focusing on trying to make that change, and instead she started focusing on a different change that was with something else she was eating earlier in the day. And guess what happened? She started releasing weight. So that's an example of how a framework can not only help you convey to your clients how something works and maybe even integrate a story with it, but to also enable them to really more easily comprehend what you're sharing. So that's an example of a framework.
So that is much closer to what I was thinking of as a framework. So you've got your three categorizations, your three elements required, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking of, we were talking earlier about project management, and the project management framework that is used by PMI, Project Management Institute. They have 10 different domains of understanding required to run a project, right? There's communications, there's authority, there's resources, all these different things that you have to have. And I think maybe that really is more like what the framework is. It's more of a, Scott, I think maybe it's more of a blueprint.
Oh, I like that word. It's a blueprint.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this is like these are Euler's circles, right? If I remember from my logic class.
This is a Venn diagram.
Venn diagram, okay.
Yeah. But
Which is-
what it got me to thinking is what you and I want to build are actually usable processes built on a framework that we can give people so that they can, if we give them the process, they can de-escalate their thinking, they can get into the critical thinking mode, they can start to question things in a manner that is constructive for them. And the framework is something that hopefully they'll all learn at some point, but you need to give them something that's the shortcut to get there first. So I think so it'd be great if we could figure out what the blueprint, the framework is for what we want. But I think we start with how we would tackle a particular situation and just build from there.
That's interesting. Shelly, one thing, what's the difference between motivation and willingness? To me, those are the same thing.
Well, motivation is your reason for doing it. Whereas to me, willingness is are you really going to follow through? Like, are there blocks that might be existing? And I do take your point. There is that could be construed in that way, that motivation and willingness are very similar. So you're making me think.
That's what the show's all about, making you
There
think.
is there's crossover, I think, but
Yeah.
I also I get your idea when you said willingness. Are you willing to exercise and go through the muscle pain and go through the heavy breathing and the high heart rate and the sweat, which by the way I'm not, which is my problem. That I am motivated for health reasons to lose weight, but am I motivated enough that I'm willing?
Yeah.
Does motivation by itself beat the willingness, right? And
So
one of
that
the
makes
things you can
sense, yeah.
do for willingness is lower the bar of effort by, what was the thing? Keep your shoes next to your next to the door so it's easier to go out running. For me, keeping my gloves out next to the door so when I go out to garden, I'm more willing to touch the wet, yucky plants. Things like that lower the bar. Little habits that make it easier so that it doesn't take as much motivation or willingness to actually do it.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, that's so interesting. Okay, so then you use this technique to teach and to sell, but how do your clients use this? Do you have any insight into how they use this? Or is that they just see the picture now? They're like, oh, I see the different components and I understand how they relate to each other.
I find that they see the picture more clearly. And I do find specifically with my audience too, the one that's the big ding, ding, ding moment for them is willingness. Like, oh, that's why. That's why. I
And when you
mean,
say,
sometimes it's the other ones, but I find that that is the dominant factor that gets in their way of sticking to changes.
so when you say willingness, just that's just doing the work, right?
Yeah, like uh, doing the work and sticking to it consistently and being willing to sacrifice because a lot of times you're giving something up as part of having that willingness.
Oh yeah, this is
Or
really
sometimes you just perceive yourself as giving something up. Like when I was sharing that sometimes in my community it's tied, there's food memories. So when it's tied to something like that, they perceive it that they're giving up an experience or a person that it's tied to when they're really not. They just need to find a different way to stay connected to that person or that memory.
well,
I met a gentleman earlier this week. He says he does timeline therapy, which he tried to explain it to me, but he did a real bad job explaining it. After listening for 5 minutes, I said, you help people go back into their past and re-image something to reframe some thought in the past that made them act in a certain way, right? Why do you act this way? Because something happened in your past. And it seems like that's what you're talking about, is going and trying to find the things that make you feel the way you do about food, the way you feel about exercise, the way you feel about body image, whatever it is, and reframe it such that you take away whatever's holding you back from being what you want.
Yeah, and then separately, we do work to help them when they do find blocks like that. This is like a whole other animal in my program, but helping them rewire.
Mhm.
build new habits. This is really interesting. This is, yeah, I see yeah, this is kind
Well,
of
I
cool.
mean, if you think about it, you had an experience and you filter it through the eyes of whatever your mindset, your experience was at that time. If you were a 7-year-old kid when you experienced it, you might think of it totally differently than if you're a 40-year-old experiencing that.
Yes.
And it could be the exact same experience, and it should be the exact same physical sensations, but your mind knows it to be something different when you're a 40-year-old than when you're a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
You know, and you create your own stories. It's so interesting when I think of that too. You could have been in the same moment with other people and you all remember it differently.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Like I know my dad and his two sisters, they would always tell this story of growing up in a small town in Iowa, and they one of them was smoking a cigarette, and all three of them were together, but one of them was smoking a cigarette. And the town was so small that by the time they got home, my grandpa Tilly, their dad, knew about it, and he was angry. And so the way my dad tells the story is he was the one smoking the cigarette. And my grandpa was giving him a piece of his mind and he tugged on his ear. And he was so scared when he tugged on his ear that he peed his pants. Yet his sister Judy tells the story, oh no, it was me smoking the cigarette. He tugged on my ear and I peed my pants. And his sister Sandy thinks it happened to her.
Mhm.
So it's a very interesting dynamic that we create our own stories, and that's very powerful in creating change in your life and the way you perceive things.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know Chris and I spent a lot of time talking about the truth and what is the truth. So they all 100% believe that they knew the truth, but probably only one of them actually had the truth. Maybe none of them. Maybe the story was totally made up altogether,
No, we
right?
got to go back to what truth is.
Yeah.
They all had different facts, and they didn't line up, so they didn't all agree on the facts,
Hmm.
right? They all said they smoked the cigarette. That means the facts are all different. So any truth associated with, if you don't have the same facts to work from, there's no way that they can agree on what they say is the truth. Right? We talked about this last time, Scott, right? You and I, because we think alike, because we accept the same facts in the world, we can say this is the truth, at least between us on a topic.
Because we
But in
agree.
a situation like that, all three of them had different memories, which means they had different facts in their story.
Different
Hmm.
facts. Yeah, that's
Right? And
interesting.
you know how eyewitness testimony is considered faulty
Yeah.
because people remember different things, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what reality was. It doesn't matter what the real fact was.
No.
In that person's mind, that's what they saw.
Yeah. Yeah, there's going to be no way you can convince them otherwise. I mean,
Humankind is screwed. We're all going to we all have different opinions, and we're never going to get in agreement again. And yeah,
yeah,
okay.
that's fascinating. That's like super good. That's like awesome. That's so then basically, I mean, now that I'm saying if we want to be a little flexible, you could say blueprint, framework, process. I mean, they're kind of, there might be nuance, but they're generally the same thing, right?
I think
Absolutely.
process is closer to something that you
Yeah.
do, you actually act upon.
Although I will say this, the concept of frameworks help me think through processes because sometimes I haven't put, like, I know I do something or I know I've done something that contributed to my long-term success and my journey. And as I'm trying to think through, well, what did I do? How did I convey it? Or how do I convey it to my clients? Sometimes I find I use Canva a lot for my frameworks, and I'll go into the elements and I'll type in 4 part, and I'll just get like all these different graphic images that maybe have four parts. And sometimes the visuals help me think through the steps.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Hmm.
And so it can work that way too. And then other times it can help me break down things that are complicated. For instance, I created a whole new workshop that I did for my clients this week. And it was on body image, and I had 10 tactics to help them build a better body image for day 2 of my workshop. And I was like, man, this feels like a lot of information. It feels kind of overwhelming. So you can use frameworks to break things down or kind of put them in a nicer container. Like I can still convey those 10 points, but I created a 3-point framework because when I looked at them, I'm like, okay, what's like 3 or 4 buckets that these 10 things could fall into? And so I ended up that to build a better body image, these 10 tactics worked into 3 buckets: detox, heal, and then feed it new tools. So, or new inputs. So I split those into 3 things, and that's how I started the conversation. You need these 3 things to build a better body image. And then I started by going into the tactics that related to detoxing, and then the habits that related to healing, and then the habits that related to feeding new inputs.
So is a framework always visual? Maybe it's a way of visual thinking then?
I think it's a way
Good
of
question.
communicating a concept quickly,
And then,
however that is.
yeah, so to me, when I saw that, I may know all that stuff, but it's like, oh, now I understand the relationship, how things are related to each other. And then it's like, oh, now I have more clarity on what's going on, actually. Oh, that's pretty cool.
I can tell you if I'm just having a conversation with someone, I don't have any of my visuals with me because I've created them and understand them in that way. I think I can share with them the concept in a way that they better understand, even if they don't see the visual. I do think it's even more impactful when you have the visual too, because so many people are visual learners.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shelly, does it make a difference what type of learner the person is? Whether they're visual or auto or the tactile?
Well, I would just be speculating, but I would say that it holds value for any type of learner. And one thing to point out is when you're using a framework, you're also integrating other elements. It's more than just visual. There's words that go with it. And, maybe you tell a story that invokes,
Hmm.
that makes people think of more like tactile things.
Yep.
So, to me, I think it can only add to the conversation. I don't think there'd really be any type of learner that it would detract from.
Okay. And you talk a lot about food with the weights, etc. So there's got to be a smell component, because food smell is a lot of the
Oh, yeah.
food connections for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and visuals will trigger smell senses
Oh, yeah.
and memories.
Yeah. In fact, when you mention that, a lot of times, smell and taste, I am very careful in all of my materials. I don't put pictures of food because I'm afraid that I'm going to trigger a
Okay.
craving in someone.
That's interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
So, two things I wanted to bring up. You mentioned the graphics, Shelly. So, what came to my mind is something that I discovered a couple weeks ago called napkin.ai.
Oh, yeah.
Napkin is like writing on the back of a napkin.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And you can give it a prompt and it will generate graphics that you can use in slide decks and the like. So, I found it to be interesting. I won't say it's perfect, but it was a nice shortcut to have. So that's something, I don't know if you want to try playing around because you use Canva. Canva will have a lot of stock, but this will, you put in the prompt. You say, I want a graphic that shows my 3-step process, blank, 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 and all that, and it will create like 15 different versions for you to choose from.
And
So
what was it called again?
napkin.ai.
Napkin.ai. I'm going to have to check that out. And I know I need to get on the AI bandwagon in general. I've been very resistant to that because I feel like I feel like it takes away some of my authorship.
It does feel that way, but I think, I would have said 5 years. Now I think it's about 18 months, and it's gonna really hurt a lot of people in the next 18 months.
Yeah, yeah. So and I've been watching some of the ways that Scott uses it. So I'm like, okay, I'm sold. I got to get on this.
I was telling Scott earlier, I made a 10-minute video for YouTube without ever writing a thing or filming a thing. I said, make a script for me, and made a script with all the prompts, here, cut to a scene of this, cut to a scene of that. I popped it into another AI and I ran it and it pulled it out. And the only thing I did was I went in and put a few pauses into the AI voiceover because it was speaking too fast. That's it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is
It's
scary.
amazing. And my question, and I heard one person's answer who had apparently researched this, but I don't know how accurate it is. Maybe some of you know. So one of the things I would like to do in the next year of many is one of them I'd like to write a book. And obviously, if I had key points I wanted to make and key ideas, I could use AI to support that. But when you use AI for something like that to write a book, who has the copyright? Who owns it?
You do.
Yeah.
You do?
You do.
Okay.
Yes.
Because
To protect
I guess,
yourself, to protect yourself, I would sign up. Well, Scott's got the paid one, so use the paid one, and you'll definitely get the rights to it. The free one, I think
okay.
you have the rights as well, but just make sure you're using his account, and then you'll definitely have it. That's one
Okay.
thing they have talked about. Like right now, the big thing is coding, right? Everyone's coding apps, and the idea is who owns the code. Right? And it's just a tool. It's not. It's not. It's considered a tool. It's not considered the author.
Mhm. And then
Right?
if you use it, do you have to disclose in the copyrighted material that you used AI to support the creation?
YouTube asks you, but it's voluntary whether you answer that or not.
Okay.
Some places do want to know specifically, and if you don't attribute it, then you might get called out on it. But yeah, right now I don't think they can necessarily catch you. And it also depends on how you intend to use it, right? Like I saw a guy using it to write articles, and he used it the same way like a reporter and an editor at a newspaper might figure things out. They would sit down, they'd hash through a topic, they'd come up with the main key points they want to talk about. They go off, do some research, come back with a few points, talk through them, see how they want to approach it, and then they go off and write the story. And this guy used AI, he used ChatGPT just like that. He goes, here's my idea for a story. And the 3 points I want to make. Give me 5 sets of 3 points more to consider. And it would do that. And he'd pick the ones he wanted. Okay, here's my idea of a hook that I wrote that worked really well. Show me some other hooks that I could use. And it would come up with some other ones.
Yeah.
And then he said, okay, now piece all that together and then he would actually go and write the stuff. But I've seen people, and if you're going to do a book, you probably want to go chapter by chapter. You don't want to say, write the whole book for me. If you do that, it'll come out like, ugh. But if you do chapter by chapter, then it's an iterative process, and you still have your stamp on the text. So,
Yeah, I used AI last night to write my Toastmaster speech this morning.
yeah.
Crazy. It took me like 5 minutes. Normally, it take me like 2 hours.
Well, I wrote one this morning because I wasn't sure if they needed a third speaker or not. So I just said, right, because I have a whole chat that I've been going over on I told you, believing versus knowing.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, write me a speech on believing versus knowing.
And here's the thing I learned, Chris. Like we're getting away from frameworks right now, but I learned a really important point. There's a big difference between writing the speech and giving the speech. Those are completely
Oh, yeah.
and distinct
Yeah.
separate skill sets.
But there's a performance aspect, which is why
There-
sometimes I'll take someone else's speech and give their speech. If you
Yeah.
go, just take a famous speech, you know,
Mhm.
take a Martin Luther King speech and give it.
I have a dream. Yeah, exactly.
I just imagine then it's all about delivery.
Yeah.
Then it's about your ability to perform. That's a totally and that's a skill set that we don't really practice in Toastmasters.
No.
But that would be
Actually,
neat.
I remember when I was in Toastmasters long ago, back in the days when it was like the live meetings. I do remember one of the people in our group, they took one of JFK's speeches and they did it live to the group. And it was so interesting to see the contrast. Same words.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I've done Paul Harvey stories twice now,
No.
and I just find the stories were nice and short. They're like 3 minutes long. So how I deliver it, how would I do, and I just it frees you up because then it's all about performance. It's
Yeah.
not about the content.
Yeah.
So it's kind of freeing in some ways. Well, the other thing I was going to bring up is you mentioned storytelling. I think you make your own stories. Was it you who gave a speech once in Toastmasters about alter egos?
I may have, because I do talk about alter
Because there was a
ego.
speech someone gave about alter egos, and that's when they mentioned Beyonce having her alter ego, the Sasha
Sasha
Fierce alter ego.
Pierce
And
and
of course
Kobe
now she has the
Bryant had
Cowboy
one.
Carter one, right? And yeah, so maybe it was you who gave the speech, but it stuck in my head the idea of making the person you want to be inhabiting that body until you're comfortable with it and it
Yeah.
becomes who you are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so even like the whole thing today, someone was talking about Tony Robbins has the four different mindsets, right? The lover, the warrior, the magician, and the sovereign, right? Those are all different mindsets. Those are kind of alter egos, right?
Yeah.
This is the mindset that I'm looking at the situation in. This is the mindset that I'm looking at the situation in. It really seems like it's a way to build that mindset. And it occurs to me,
I'm sorry,
There's
guys.
that-
I got delivery. I'll be right back.
Okay. Take your
there's
time.
that imposter syndrome that we all feel, and we need to get comfortable saying it's okay not to make up your story, but to make your story,
Yeah.
right? So I want to be this. So I define what that is and create all the aspects of it. And I make that into an alter ego, or I make that into a goal. And then I work towards that, right? So at the moment, I'm not that.
Yeah.
But if the story is to get to that, I think it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I think of, one of my old bosses who had this story about how he came to America and how he became successful and all that sort of thing. And I heard the story so many times, it was kind of a joke. But it was his story. And he told it to everyone, and everyone knows his story. Everyone knew his background. Everyone understood that aspect, and he encompassed that so much that became his image. And I'm like, I think I don't know how much of it's true.
It doesn't
But
matter.
I find,
Doesn't matter.
and I find too, I look at it a little bit differently. And that's that I have all of those things inside of me.
Mhm.
It's just there's certain elements of my personality that I have to dig a lot deeper to bring out because bringing them out is scary.
Mhm.
And so for me, getting out there, speaking to people, doing what I do, for someone like me who's an introvert, that was really, really scary. So my alter ego was somewhat based on Jamie Kern Lima, who founded It Cosmetics. She's like sold it for over $1 billion to Revlon and became CEO of Revlon. And she was told that she couldn't be the person on video selling her product on QVC because she was too large. She wasn't the right image. And she was like, but it's my product. And so she fought that for a long time, and she finally broke the mold and got on QVC, sold her product, made it what it is. But like because of the courage she took to get past, how people see you and whatnot, there's such an element that ties to what I do, and then her public presentation part of that. I found that very helpful just to picture her, to tap into that part of me that I knew was down in there somewhere. And then it, it it's amazing how it can help you tap into the courage you need to bring out that best part of you.
Yeah, because what happens is normally other people give you permission, right? You could be in the army or this, and you're authorized that you are now a soldier, but you're giving yourself permission. You're now authorizing yourself to act as if or behave, have a different personality. That's like awesome. It's kind of like you're an actor.
Mm-hmm.
You are. It's the fake it till you make it aspect, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
which is totally
yeah,
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
as long as you know what you're faking,
Yeah,
then you're
yeah.
good.
Mhm.
And at some point, you're not faking anymore. You're like, oh, actually,
That's the idea. Is to, yeah.
you know?
I was listening to a guy who is a productivity coach, and he was saying the way he specific for students, and said the way he teaches people, he calls it reverse engineering your goals.
Mhm.
It's not quite that, but the idea was figure out your end state, right? And then, and of course, big goals you don't make it in one step. You've got to go build it step by step along the way. But he said, don't worry about the goal. Worry about the person where that goal is the natural outcome of the way they are, right? If you're, yeah, and you want to become the person to where that goal is the outcome. Right? The goal itself is not the goal. Yeah, that's actually just the outcome of being the person that would have that.
Oh, I see.
So
Yeah.
then it was like around, okay, the goal is to become the person. And then he started saying, okay, so what are the skill sets? What do I need to know? Rate myself. I need a 9 out of 10 on charisma or personality or sales or whatever. And what am I now? I'm a 2. Okay, that's my gap I got to work on.
Yeah.
A very analytical way to look at it, but I did think as he was talking, I was like, yeah, you're building. That's your alter ego right there. That's the one you want to be over there, and you got to get to it. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty awesome. Okay, Shelly, I know you're supposed to be here for half an hour and it's like you're over time. So is there any last words of encouragement or anything else you want us to know?
Well, I could very quickly just flip through a couple
Yeah,
visuals,
perfect.
because frameworks I have dozens of frameworks at this point, and they all look so different. So the quadrant is a great way to convey frameworks, because you've got your axes where you're bringing in two elements. And this is one I help people identify where they're at in their journey and where they want to go. Another one, you can do something like a lot of pyramids. This is what I use to show the typical journey of someone who has bariatric surgery, and not just showing the journey. These are words that they can relate to, feelings that they can relate to, and actions at each step. And it's amazing how excited people get when they see this stuff. And
Yeah.
then I had that one I showed you, can be as simple as like, oh, there's 4 steps, here they are. But when you make it visual, it just seems so much more sophisticated, right? So
Mhm.
that's just a couple I threw together. And uh, you can get so creative with them and have so much fun. But frameworks have changed my world. And, especially if you're someone like me that has a hard time, like a Scott, he can convey his points very concisely and very elegantly. I have a hard time. It's almost like something gets in the way from here to here. And frameworks help bridge that gap for me. So I love them.
Shelly, if we have somebody that would be interested in your program, how do we get in touch with you?
I have a website, WLS, which is the acronym for weight loss surgery. It's WLSdelight.com. And
DELIGHT.
DELIGHT. So WLSdelight.com.
Okay.
And I usually have programs that people can get into. Like once a quarter, I do free boot camps. It's a 3-day workshop, an hour a day, and people can get a taste of what I offer. And I also, they can just get on notification lists to know when my next boot camps are coming up, when my academy is open for enrollment. And I also have a small product on there too, if people want to get a quick taste of what I do.
Okay.
But yeah, they can find me there. And then I also have a YouTube channel by the same name, WLS Delight.
Okay. That's great.
I'll add
I
that to
work-
the show notes too.
Yeah, I work with a couple of not-for-profits here locally for women that have been in trauma situations, and they service the community, and I wanted to share this resource with them, and maybe it would be something to connect the two of you. And
Absolutely.
you can do that. I came up with an idea here locally where I was working with these people. I retired a year and a half ago, and I've been doing volunteer stuff. I thought a women's self-care network would make sense with the trauma people, somebody like you, somebody in yoga, somebody just in general fitness, somebody in nutrition, et cetera, et cetera. I offered it to several women and nobody ran with it, and I can't run with it. It's got to be women based, but that's the concept of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great concept. And, I find that so many of the clients I do work with have some pretty severe trauma in their background because, as I know many of you know, weight for many people, especially women, is often a form of protection.
Yep.
I can hide behind this. I'm not at risk. So yes.
And more physically present if there's a physical confrontational part of the trauma. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on here today. It was fun. And, it's interesting when you talk through things that are part of your life and things that you use, each time you talk through them with different groups of people, it sparks new ideas and you see things differently yourself. So it's been fun to be on with all of you today.
Awesome. Shelly, thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Well, a different definition of frameworks.
Yeah, and it's different also because men and women perceive the same situation completely differently.
Yes.
I think the way she
the way the brain-
characterized it was different, but I don't think it was different. It was
it's
the
not-
basis.
It's a perception.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
But
still
there-
the idea that here's these base things that you need to build upon.
Mhm.
And because as she was talking, I was thinking, like I said, of the project management framework, right? And there's these 10, if you're following the American one, there's these 10 domains you have to do. And the domains have a bunch of criteria, like you need to make sure you've got communication and alignment and blah, blah, and it gives you some generic rules. You communicate on a periodic, on a set schedule or something like that. What that actually means in process is, oh, I'm going to schedule a weekly meeting. I'm going to take meeting notes. I'm going to distribute the meeting notes via email. That's a process,
Yeah.
right? None of that's in the framework. The framework just says communicate regularly, right? So I think when you and I start thinking through like scenarios, like someone insults you, how am I going to go walk through that process to get through that? Someone states an opinion that you totally disagree with them. You think they're wrong and they're idiots. How do you get through that, right? Or or somebody on the far left or the far right says something and triggers you because it's a topic that's sensitive for you. How do you calm down from that, right? All those things, the process might be slightly different. But once we start looking at the process, we look, what are we actually doing? Well, the first thing is to de-escalate, to get the emotion out of the way, to go back into your head and away from your heart, or whatever it is that we're talking about. That's like the first part of a framework in my mind. That would be the consistent thing across all of these.
Yeah.
Right? To get away from the biology and to go into the mental stuff.
Yeah.
And then what's the next thing? And what's the next thing? And then we'll have a framework. I think the framework's not going to be that much different than what you see in critical thinking.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, can I bring up jujitsu again? Because I bring it up every
I thought
time.
you were going to bring it up when he was talking about services. You needed a female jujitsu teacher to teach him self-defense.
Yeah,
Right.
it's interesting because in jujitsu, a framework is kind of like, in my mind, it's more high level. It's like the what and the big picture. And then you start going into now, this is what you got to do. Now, these are like the multiple different kinds of tactics that will accomplish that particular task. Like here, for an example, right? I just want to force everything into jujitsu. It's like, I don't, I just, it's so one thing is that you don't want to get emotional. Like whenever you're fighting, you don't want to get too emotional because if you get emotional and you're dealing with another guy that knows what he's doing, you're going to lose every single time, right? Because
Mhm.
you just start doing really dumb stuff actually. And so part of the jujitsu process that they don't tell you what's happening is they just make you roll around on the ground and they put a lot of pressure on you, not trying to hurt you, but just making you very uncomfortable. And they're inoculating you against a certain kind of stress, right? So if you get on the ground and somebody's on top of you, yelling at you, they're going to kill you. After you do that for a couple of years, you're like, yeah, it doesn't really even bug you anymore, in some way. And I think where am I going with this? Chris, finish my thought. What am I going with this? I think they're teaching you these things, but they're not telling you that I don't even know where I'm going with
No, 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 no. Okay, so that last aspect, like I said, I think we all have processes we learned from school, from parents, from friends, from wherever, that, or even ones that you may have built on your own just through logical reasoning, processes that you've built to handle situations.
that. Yeah,
The
right.
older we get, I mean, we're older, we probably don't get insulted by someone, calling us something about our physical characteristics anymore. It's like, oh, whatever, you're entitled to your opinion. I don't give a damn.
Yeah,
But when
whatever.
you're
Fine.
younger, that might trigger you, right? So
Yeah.
we actually learn to handle those things. Now, whether we've ever gone through and said, this is part of this framework doing this, no, that's not what we're learning. We're learning how to do it. And I think when you're learning the jujitsu processes, the moves, and the like, that's what you're learning. You're not learning the framework. You're learning the actual tools and process flows to allow you to get through a situation. Now, your masters probably have figured out how those things fit together into some kind of a broad framework,
Oh,
but I don't
absolutely.
know
Yeah.
that your average jujitsu student is going to get to that point ever.
No, they occasionally will teach it too, but most of the time it's like just do this, do this. And they're not trying to explain what's happening, but they just understand the process. This is how we train. And that's you're right. They might even not even hang on. I mean, the master does because, of course, he's the master, right? He
Mhm.
understands everything. But just your average low level guy teaching you the technique, he may not understand exactly why, but he knows, I know this stuff works, so just do this and you'll be okay.
Mhm. Which, honestly, what to teach someone a tool may take an hour of effort. To
Yeah,
teach
right.
someone the deep understanding of it may take a decade of effort, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're not going to get them to that level with our little podcast here. What we're going to do is we're going to hopefully give them an inkling to understand the beginning of how they would react to something in a more positive way. And hopefully from there, there's value in it. They see the value in it. Then they'll go to take the next step and the next step, and then they start the journey towards better understanding. But even if all they get is the tools, that will help.
That will help. Yes, that will help because at least if you get pressure applied to you, anything dangerous, at least hang on, let me be careful. At least you know what to do that will help you. At least you're not going to do something totally stupid as if somebody completely untrained. Because a lot of
Yeah.
the techniques in jiu-jitsu, these are not intuitive techniques. These are not something you would just naturally do. You've got to
But
sort of
so
train this in.
let's walk through the scenario where you're a young guy and some guy comes up and insults you.
Yeah, right.
He insults your manhood. He insults, I don't know, he just somehow insults you,
Yeah,
right? So the typical reaction of someone who's younger is probably going to be emotional first. Oh my God.
yeah, right.
Now, why are you getting angry?
Yeah,
Some guy who you don't know who I mean, why, if they have certain social standing, that might have an impact on it, right? But why are you getting angry? Oh, because my friends might see this and think lower of me. He goes,
I'm
if they're your
embarrassed or
friends,
whatever it
if they're
is.
really your friends, they know who you are.
Yeah.
This insult's going to be like, oh, he's just some guy insulting, right? It's it. There's a certain mindset that they need to get into. That as you get older and more experienced, you realize that people just spouting off at the mouth are just spouting off at the mouth,
Whatever. Right.
right? But when
Harmless.
you're younger, you're going through all these things like, oh, that's an attack on me. Oh, I've got to defend myself. I've got to show that I'm strong. I got to show
Yeah.
that I can do this. My friends are going to see me and they're going to think less of me, or this girl over here is going to think less of me. You know, first of all, you can't control everyone else's thoughts. That's the one thing you need to learn too, right? The only thing you can control is your own. And then if you start
That's
thinking
next to
through,
impossible, Chris. That's
well,
super hard doing
as
that.
you start to think about, you know, how you can react to something, if you react defensively, maybe that's what they wanted you to do,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
Mhm.
yeah.
When if you just switched it, instead and accepted the insult and bought into the insult.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's me. I'm just whatever, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly everyone around you realizes it didn't impact you at all.
Yeah.
You're not bothered by it all.
No.
Yeah. And so therefore whether it's true or not is irrelevant because to you it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Now, getting to that realization, at what point do you get to that? Do you get to that when you're 15, when you're 30, when you're 80? When do you get to that realization? And so trying to get people to understand that what they see immediately when they're in an emotional state is not reality. And no matter what you think, it's not reality, but if you can get someone to understand that, then they can look at this and go, okay, what's going on around here? Someone just came up and insulted someone, whatever. Someone came up and insulted me. Someone came up and shoved me out of the way. And what's going on, right?
Yeah.
You need a moment to assess.
Yeah.
And if you go strictly on emotion, you're going to misread the situation.
Probably almost all the time. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if there's any way to learn that other than just through a lot of repetition and trial and training. I know Jordan Peterson talks about, like, if people are freaked out in elevators, what you do is you don't force them to go to the elevator. It's like you force them just to stand there and look at it, and you're like, okay, now you can go in. Now, next day, I just want you to put one toe in and immediately pull it out. And so this period of slowly inoculating you, they're like, you can go in an elevator and not freak out, And yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I get it. It makes sense, particularly if these are really causing you serious mental problems. But
Yeah.
it's also the idea of quitting drinking, quitting smoking, quitting drugs. You just, go cold turkey, or do you go slowly? And two different mentalities, right? I mean,
Two different mentalities, and they both work for different people. Some people just can't do the cold turkey. Other people are like, listen, they got to stop, right?
I understand why you might put someone on, is it methadone that they put people on to get them off of other drugs?
Yeah, like
So you're giving him a lesser drug to get them off of other drugs. I'm like, is that better or not worse than just saying, no, stopping all the drugs? I guess if it would kill them otherwise, maybe it makes sense.
Well, and I think what they do is they want to eliminate withdrawal symptoms, which, like, if you're coming off heroin or something, from what I understand, it is brutal for like several days. It is.
I'm wondering, maybe your body does that on purpose, and maybe it'll teach you not to get on the drugs again. Let's find the silver lining in everything. Withdrawal symptoms are bad because it was bad for your body, and now the next time you're thinking about maybe taking those drugs, you're like, I don't want to go through that again.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know. I don't know if there's thought. It could be just
I often
biology,
think the pain we suffer is there for a reason.
Yeah, well, I think pain in general is just to alert you to say, hey, something's wrong, so pay attention,
Mhm.
I mean, if you saw someone who didn't suffer any kind of emotional pain or whatever when a loved one died, you would think pretty poorly of them.
Yeah, you would think there's...
You want them to have that pain. You don't want them to suffer pain, but you want them to have that pain because that means that there was a relationship there that actually meant something.
Yeah, you got to be careful about that because everybody grieves in different ways. So just because you're going to grieve that way doesn't mean they're not grieving, So this is complicated. I've talked to like grieving special, and they're like, this is a really complicated thing, and everybody does it different. And people will go from like literally crying, like, in 5 minutes later they're laughing, and they're just all over the map, So.
And it's okay to be sad, but it's not okay to let it control your life. It's okay to accept the moment.
Yeah, that's easier said than done, actually.
Again, how do you? So I think this is the hardest part of what we're trying to teach people is that first step of getting out of the emotion, getting out of the biology, getting out of whatever it is that's keeping you in that tied to because emotions when you have them tend to be strong.
Yeah.
Right. And so just getting that first, it's like, was it the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous is to admit you've got a problem?
Yeah.
Yes.
You've got to admit your emotions are a problem.
Mhm.
Like, well, they can be, right?
Yeah. So, but how do you do that, right? By being more self-aware, by understanding how your body works, by looking at a situation where you reacted poorly and looking back and what was going through my mind when that happened, right? It's really amazing when you see someone do it on the fly. I think it's interesting. I go, what am I feeling right now? What is going on, right? And you can see that they're experiencing the emotion, but they're also using logic and reason to figure out, hey,
Yeah.
this is
If
that's really kind of fun to watch someone go through that because you're like, there's two things going on in opposition right there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember in Jiu-Jitsu, there was a guy who was amazing. I watched it for half an hour. And this guy was getting in a move, and the other guy was like messing with his neck, and he was freaking out. So he must have had some kind of trauma with the neck thing. But the master was there literally laying on the ground 2 inches away, going, look, the fight's not at your neck. Ignore that. Ignore it. The fight's here, not at your neck, actually. But it's like over and over and over. I mean, as much as that went in, there was something that was overriding that message. He's like, no, 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 no. I'm in danger. I'm in danger. And so it was an emotion versus like actually what was. And he eventually overcame it, but it probably took like literally 30 minutes and probably 30 to 50 like cycles through where he started not to get after his neck. It took a long time.
But how many years was it there?
Well, I don't know that. I don't even know what it was. I
So
just,
if it only took half an hour to fix it, that could be impressive, actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's amazing. And then you start thinking like, what areas am I emotional in? And you're not even aware of it because you can be so emotional, you can't even see it. You need somebody outside to see it for you.
Often when I get worked up and my voice goes up and my speech patterns get faster, I don't feel anything. I don't notice anything on my side. So people will go, "Oh, you were so worked up. You were so emotional. You were so whatever, forceful about what you said, what you thought and believed." And I go, "Really?"
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. That's so interesting.
Mhm.
But I do think we talked earlier about common sense being kind of a mixture of critical thinking and of experience and knowledge, wisdom, basically.
Yeah,
I think the big thing that makes it easier to be self-aware is wisdom, is to understand you know how people generally are than when you experience them. When you take an insult from someone, do you really think they were insulting you? How often are you interpreting an insult when there is no insult meant?
Mhm.
Because quite often people easily get triggered. What I saw a quote, it was on a podcast saying, if you're easily triggered, you're easily manipulated,
oh, absolutely,
Yes.
right?
absolutely.
So the idea here being, what is it that's triggering me? And it's it me who's interpreting it that way and has nothing to, and it is. You know,
Yeah,
your response, I don't care what someone says to you, no matter how horrible the thing they say to you, you choose to be offended or not,
yeah, 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 yeah.
Mhm.
But let me
right?
tell you,
And
that's
that's what he
hard too.
offended me. No, 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 no. He said something hopefully to get you
Yeah,
to
right.
be
It was
offended, but
attempting
you're
to.
the one who decided to be offended,
Mhm, mhm.
right? He could have been nicer and said nice words and not use those words. And there was a whole argument I was watching where it was a trans discussion with one of the right wing guys. I forgot which one. It's the one where he's going up against 20 or 25 liberal students.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think I saw.
And the words he used were specifically designed to have ultra negative consequences,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Like, should this be eradicated?
yeah,
Not should we get rid of it, right? Should this be eradicated?
yeah.
So
Right.
the word eradicated is not, I don't care what you say, the same thing as getting rid of something.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
So they were saying, you want to kill off these people. I never said
yeah,
that. So, and that's when you are trying to trigger a response, and that's someone who's manipulating you,
yeah. Right, right.
right? So when you hear a word that has nuance to it that is strong,
Yeah,
then you need to think, why is that word being used?
yeah.
Right?
Well,
If I say
it's an
he
attack.
killed somebody else,
Yeah.
he murdered somebody else,
Hmm.
he slaughtered somebody else.
Yeah.
Each of those, in essence, means the same thing, but not. Right?
Mhm.
If I say the word slaughter, it's going to leave an image in your mind that's totally different.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you can totally manipulate people by using those techniques. And we
Yeah.
we learn the basics in marketing, right? Like if you ask somebody, two questions and you'll get different answers. Like, how fast was that speeding car moving, right? Versus if you ask the question, well, how fast was that slow moving car moving or whatever? And you'll get totally different answers.
Yeah.
Oh,
People are
yeah.
not even, they're not even aware of what you're doing to them.
You've primed them for that.
You're priming them. Yeah.
So this is so this is something I like to do, and I know I'm weird, but I hope other people can learn to do this. When you hear a question, I was thinking about this just yesterday. When you hear statistics,
Yeah.
and there's a book, I think, How to Lie with Statistics or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But when you hear a statistic, do you accept it or do you think about what that statistic means? I always try to go into the statistic. Like,
I was trained to that in my first accounting class. It's like, it was Mr. Woodall, it was beautiful. And he's like, listen, let me explain how this works, right? What you do is you figure out what you want to say. What do you want the numbers to be? And then you work backwards to get to that number.
yeah.
And that was like
Well,
day one.
Well, no, but not just that. I mean, it's like, what are you measuring in this? What are you telling me in this? What do you want me to derive from this? You know, and quite often it's like, I see the statistic you say, I don't pull out the information or the opinion from it that you do, right? Quite often it's that, or quite often it is a statistic that it could be a biased statistic, it could be a statistic on the wrong thing, it could be a statistic that's being misinterpreted. There's all kinds of places where this could fall apart.
Yeah.
And so I always go, who did that study? What was that from?
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the stupidity that somehow we love statistics. So sports statistics are always the ones that get to me. This is the first time since 1998 that a half Asian American baseball player playing in a Western Conference game in the third game of a World Series has struck out.
Yes.
What the hell did I just say? It's a
And the
statistic
history
with
of
no meaning.
mankind. Well, it's important. It's like everybody, oh, that's a big deal.
So I love statistics, but I also love to take them apart.
Yes.
Yeah.
And same with questions. When someone gives me an opinion, the news yesterday or the day before was saying a new study is out that tells you when the perfect time to eat dinner is.
Yeah.
You should eat dinner 3 to 5 hours before you go to bed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, every culture that I know of says, don't eat 3 hours before bed and don't eat an hour after you wake up. Some version of that.
Yeah.
And that, you know, these things go back thousands of years, and we needed a study to tell us this. And I'm like, and none of you as news reporters even know these, you know, culturally, that a lot of cultures say these types of things. You could add context to this saying, wow, it's an interesting study. It reinforces what we've learned from cultures over the years. No one says anything like that. No one knows stuff anymore.
Well, you know.
They're just fed information that they regurgitate. No one knows anything because this is your brain.
Yep. There's like political polls, you know, approval rating is X%. You know, my first question is, well, you know, how many people do they poll? Where did they come from? You know, what's the backgrounds and all that? Okay. Now I'm going to go to the other side and find their version of the same poll in a different group of people, and you're going to get a totally different answer.
It was a phone poll done on a Friday at 2 p.m. calling people at home.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's a certain group of people you're going to get.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It just, yeah, I have that kind of argument all the time. You know, don't take facts at face value. Don't take a news story at face value. You know, Fox is going to tell you something different than CBS is, than NBC is, than CNN, and they all have their little spin at it. But get the information from several sources, verify it, and then form your opinion on what you think about something.
So that's critical thinking. But the first thing is to ask the question of yourself, right? When you hear a stat, and if it's hard for you to do, you might start with just using, this is the common sense idea. You hear something that doesn't make sense to you. It's hard for me to believe that 80% of Americans think whatever, right? Whatever that is, right? 80% of Americans think that milk is a poison. Let's say, by the way, anyone listening, I'm not saying that, but let's say that was the stat you heard. And I'd be like, you know, maybe 20% think that. Maybe it's the other way around, but 80%? No way. And then if I really cared about it, I might go and look into it and saying, what is this study about? And it turns out, oh yeah, well, raw milk because of blank or whatever milk or whatever, you might find out that there's some caveat of information in there, some piece of information in there that would change that made that result what it is.
Mhm.
It happens all the time.
All the
Yes.
time. Yes.
But if you're not primed to hear it and call it out in your own mind, you just regurgitate it.
Yeah.
Again, you didn't do those lower steps to get to the point where you've earned your opinion.
Well, everything on the internet is true. Don't you know that?
Yes, I know. I used to be part of the internet, so
That's awesome. Yeah.
it is amazing to me. Like I remember, I think I told you this, Scott. We were having a company picnic, and someone got offended because the term picnic was tied to racial lynching of black people in the South. And I'm like, what?
What?
What are you talking about? And I went online and searched some of the fact check websites, and they said there's a rumor going around and an email going around explaining that
Yeah.
that it's not true, but someone's claiming this. And because the word picnic is a French word that the English adopted in the 1700s, right? But it went around certain communities and they believed it, so they were getting offended that we were having a company picnic,
Hmm.
right? And then I said to them, "Did you check to see if this information is true?" And no, of course they didn't check.
Of course
I
not.
said, "Well, let's go check and see." And I showed them my process to go find it. They go, "Oh,"
Yeah.
And I checked more than one place because one place could be wrong, right? It's like if you go to Wikipedia for everything, it's pretty good, but sometimes it's wrong.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I want to change the
Yeah.
subject if you're okay with that. I know
Sure.
we're sitting down at our local little, like, whatever you call that place, D's. It's
Oh,
actually
our diner. Yeah.
a little diner there. And you were talking about that you've been involved in churches, if I remember, for like 50 years.
I was born and raised in a church. Both sets of grandparents and my parents founded a church in the Chicago area. My great grandfather was a minister, etc. So I was born and raised, always hanging around the church. My mom taught Sunday school, and since I was 12 years old, I'd sat on various boards and committees and all that. Yes,
That's so fascinating. So I'm gonna seems like you don't go to church anymore.
I
Um,
don't. I quit about 20 years ago, maybe even a little more.
wow. Okay, so what happened and how did you go from 50 years in church to not going to church anymore?
I was sitting by that time. I was fighting. I was old enough, quote unquote,
Yeah.
to sit on the higher level boards and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Because my point was, people would say, "Well, you got to have 25 years in this church." I said, "Okay, I was born in this church. I'm 25 years old. Therefore, I have 25 years.
Yeah.
It's not as an adult, but I have 25 years
Yeah.
experience. It's a different experience." So I did that in a Presbyterian church, and then I did Lutheran, and I sat on boards in two different Lutheran churches. And I got I go in with a business mindset. This is the business of running a church.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have certain functions, you have to pay bills, you have to take care of your buildings, et cetera, et cetera. And I would ask questions from that perspective, like, something happened and we got to repair something. A tree would fall on a, well, did we tell an insurance company, and how much settlement are we getting? How much money do we have to get to do that to make the repairs, et cetera, et cetera. And it was consistently to the point that people would not tell me what the information was. And I would say, wait a minute, we all own this church. All the members own this church. You're a part of the church. This is free information you're supposed to provide for everybody.
Yeah.
I get into those situations, and it became repetitive over time. The Presbyterian church, we had a pastor that was 55 years old. He went to the main board and said, "It's hard for me to find a job after 55, and I want to work 10 more years. If you guys aren't going to extend me a contract, then I'm going to leave."
Mm-hmm.
Well, at that point, I would tell him, leave. I don't like ultimatums.
Yeah.
But well, that's too much power with one person. And they kept him, and it was a problem long term. Got into the same thing in a Lutheran church, and multiple pastors. One guy was a hardline fist pounder and stuff like that, and it was his way or the highway, and he had his own little inner workings. And I found out sitting on the highest board that when I called to talk to the pastor and he wasn't there and left a message, the secretary chose whether or not to give him that message.
Mm-hmm.
And I confronted her. I said, you don't get to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
If I call and leave a message for him, I want to speak with him.
Mm-hmm.
This is my employee. They are only an employee of this church.
Mm-hmm.
No, they're not. They're the leaders. No, they're not. We own this church. The pastor is a major player in this church, but he is not the decision maker. We are.
Not the CEO.
Council. Yes, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So he may be
Yep.
your spiritual leader, but that doesn't, because again, you're looking at it as a business. He's not
Yes.
the CEO of the organization of the church. And I think this is quite often when we talk about the organization of the church versus the spiritual structure of the
Yep.
church.
Yep. And I found, for me, big organized religion became politicized. It's about power and money.
Mm-hmm.
At many, many different levels to different extents. And I just had enough. And I left. I am a firm believer in karma. I am a firm believer that you get what you get, and treat people like you want to. It's pretty basic for me. I don't need all these other constructs. I don't need somebody pounding the Bible and say this is exactly what was said and you have to follow it word for word. Okay, what version are we working with? Who wrote it? Man is fallible, so a man wrote it, therefore it's inherently fallible, etc., etc. Don't tell me exact. Everything's subject to interpretation, and let's get back to the basic concept of just being nice to people. And so that turned me off to organized religion, and why I'm not involved anymore.
I think one of the hardest things to argue with someone is they come in with a viewpoint that I'm doing good things, I'm helping people, I'm representing whatever, right? And they can hide behind that and do other actions saying, but I'm doing it on behalf of blank.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're able to reinforce your bad behavior, and people have a hard time calling you out on it because you've got the authority, you've got, the experience, you've got the chosen by God, although in this case not. But I mean,
I get it. Yeah.
This goes through, and what you end up with is a bubble that isn't popped. Normally in society, when someone gets too big for their britches, someone will put them in their place.
Yes, exactly.
And there are groups. I think there's multiple groups. So religion is one. I do think sometimes police forces can get this way.
Yes.
I think fighting forces a little less so, but they can get kind of this
they can
enclosed mentality, right? And any group that has like a calling that is hard to teachers, any group that has a calling that is kind of beyond just themselves has ammunition to act how they want to a certain extent. And if they don't police themselves well, the rest of us start to feel it.
Yeah, I'm originally from Chicago. The police department, those are all political animals. They're appointees, a lot of them. They're not skilled people. Teachers unions are another one. I've had fights with teachers since I was in schools. Schools and teachers unions are there to employ teachers. They're not there to
it's the organization again. It's the organization of these groups. So the individuals aren't the problem. It's when they get organized and then suddenly they're protected because of their remit.
Yep. And it's easier to pay a teacher to sit in a room and do nothing than to try and fire them.
I see.
New York has a room. Their schools are so screwed up. They have a room that several hundred teachers go there every day. That's what they do. Just sit there.
Because California, we're laying off teachers left and right. Pasadena's going to do it. Santa Ana did it. All the COVID funding finally dried up, and now they hired all those teachers, and now they got to figure out what.
Part of it is
that, and there's less kids going to school.
Yes,
the number of kids going to school has dropped. I don't know the numbers, but it's amazing. They just didn't come back from COVID, and then the numbers now are down.
Where do they do? They're just being homeschooled, or where do they go?
I don't think they've. Well, so we talked a little bit about this. Like when COVID started, my daughter's school district was as well off. So they within 4 days we were online, right? I mean, and then the next year we were all online, and then they allowed hybrid, and then everyone
Yeah.
came back. But like LA school district, the majority, there's a huge number of them that are in poorer neighborhoods. They didn't have schooling for over a year.
Wait, the
Wow.
kids didn't have any education for a year?
A lot of them didn't have internet at home. A lot of them didn't have laptops. So the school would try to
Oh
give them
my
those things,
gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
but then it's like, you don't have internet. So the only thing to do is go to the local library and use it there. So the effort, and then the parents, it's also school is a babysitter too. So,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
and it honestly, it didn't even occur to me how much of a babysitter it was until the pandemic. It was like,
Sure.
oh, this is why you don't care so much about the quality of education in the country, because you're also getting babysitting services out of this,
That's
Uh-huh.
right? So
yeah.
if you had to pay out of pocket for the schooling, you would be like, no way am I going to put up with this crappy stuff. And it's
Yep.
unfortunate because we should feel that way regardless, because these are kids, and these are the formative years. I don't know how our education system is going to be able to withstand the way it is for another 10 years. I think it's got to change.
I agree with that. There's a lot of things that are taught, I would say, from high school level and up through colleges and higher educations that is taught just to fill classrooms and get money for the things. Why would you why would you have to take a medieval history class to get a degree in psychology?
Well, you don't, but I think, see, this is the thing that bothered me, and this has bothered me ever since I was in college. I remember I was in
Mhm.
college, and there was I forgot which one. It was there was like a cultural studies. They had, like, I think African American studies, Asian American studies was a minor. Several of them were
Okay.
minors, right? And then they had a couple of the big ones, and they wanted to add um Mexican American, Hispanic American, I forgot, studies program major to the
Oh,
to the curriculum, right?
okay.
And so, the school says we don't have the money, right? And they have a lot of money, so they probably
Yeah.
could if they wanted to, but they said we don't have the money. And so there were protests. There were hunger strikes. All the professors came out in support of this. And and they're on hunger strikes. I'm like, well, this is getting political. And so the hunger strikes, eventually the school caved and created a program, hired a new dean, hired professors, hired all this stuff. Basically, in my mind, raised the cost of education by however many hundreds of dollars per person. And this
Uh-huh.
happens over and over years and
Yes.
years. So suddenly you don't have 100 majors, you have 1,000 majors, and then you have to support them. And so I'm like, you can study anything, you can specialize in all the crap you want, but you don't need to have 15, like you said, if it's psychology, 15 psychology majors. You should have one psychology major and specializations. Or maybe you need more than that. But I mean, the idea being you don't have to have every single flavor is its own major.
Yes.
And so this is the thing that got to me. It's like, I don't go and get a physics degree in quantum mechanics. I go and get a physics degree and I just study quantum mechanics,
Yeah.
right? And I study more quantum mechanics than the other guy because I liked it more. I mean, the
Uh,
fact is suddenly. So I think this is the beginning of the identity politics movement. It's like, I want to be this, and you need to give me this because this is what I identify as, and I'm just as important as everyone else. And that's, again, lack of self-awareness. Someone who's older would have been, I don't care. I'll work around it. I'll figure it out. And and then the people who wanted this, who benefited from it, were able to rile up the students and get them going and to manipulate them. I think this is what happened with all the universities getting taken over last year or the year before. All
mm,
these things are a matter of a small group of people who want something for themselves and don't care or don't think about the second order, third order consequences of all this. And everyone else that goes along because they don't even know what the first order consequences are yet, the second or third order. And this is I think what happens. And so I think to a great extent you're right. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I do think that the real education starts in high school up. But I also think that, like you said, it's also been inundated with so much fluff because we're trying to pander to everyone's personal desires and beliefs. And it
yeah.
should be, we're just going to give you some core information here to work with. But my problem is that it was also an education system designed by Carnegie and all the other big robber barons of the
Mhm.
1800s. So they taught us how to be line workers, how to be factory managers. They
Mhm.
didn't teach us how to think and develop, right?
Mhm.
Engineering came along and kind of helped build its own science. And engineering built their own practices, and those did really well for a while. But then everyone decided, let's make everything into a science. I mean, there's things that they get. The science of what? What are we studying the science of? I mean, that's not science, you know. I mean,
Yes, and then once you create something, you can never get rid of it. It's there
well,
forever.
that's the bureaucracy element, right?
Yes, it
So
is.
I still go back to my gardener. The gardener prunes the tree every year and makes it
Okay.
into the shape he wants. He doesn't let it grow out of control. Our government has no one to prune the tree. And so right now we're pruning the tree for the first time in 80 years, maybe
Yeah, very
even
long
ever.
time. Yes.
And when you think about it, that's gonna cause pain.
Oh, it's
But
not.
we're gonna have a smaller tree, and then the tree will be able to grow into a different shape than it is today. And then at that point, maybe it needs to be trimmed again, you know? And if it goes all out of control, then they're just gonna chop down the tree and we'll have to rebuild it from scratch. I mean, right? Was it the tree of liberty is fed by the blood of patriots or something like that? I forget what the quote is.
Something.
Oh, never heard that one.
That's is it Jefferson? No, I forgot who it was. I think it's the tree of liberty is fed by the blood of patriots. It's one of my favorite quotes because it's like recognizing that we may need to have some violence. Oh, Thomas Jefferson. We may need to have violence every now and then to fix things.
Hmm.
So you have to take a drastic measure to create change. Change is not subtle a lot of times. Is the
Yeah,
basic message
well,
that I would
I
hear.
think we're at a point where the legal system is just too full of laws that we've never gotten rid of. I mean, what's Trump want to do? Every new law has to have 10 laws taken away. I mean, that's like, oh God, that's common sense now. That to me is like, if you don't understand that and at least to some extent agree with the philosophy behind that, I got a severe problem with the way you think.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
here it is. The Tree of Liberty. The Tree of Liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
Hmm.
So
Tyrant.
he's basically
Okay.
saying every now and then you have to have a little bit of bloodshed
Hmm.
to keep liberty going.
And that I would take those as being extremes so that you come back to the middle ground where it's good for everybody.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking here is I hate saying this because I could easily see twisting that into a January 6th issue, right? That would be like the agenda
Mhm.
that was on the table. And it's like, no, I think the inherent idea that government is from the power of the people and the people have the right to overthrow their government, which I mean that if you look at the amendments, the guns, the not having to quarter
Yep.
troops, all those things come from being fearful of a government that did act that way.
Yes.
That is a rare thing to have built into your government's
Super
history.
rare. Yeah. In fact, I think
And
freedom of speech, I don't think any other country has that except for us, right?
nothing
UK
in
We
does.
no
have a
no
First Amendment. What's that?
The UK does.
They have a
I,
First Amendment or something similar?
I don't think it's an amendment of a constitution because they're technically a monarchy,
we
but
get
it's
most
in
of
there.
our most of our views come from Western thought from the British, and the British were the ones who
Yeah.
kind of built the Western thought the way it started the Western thought the way it is today. Of course, now you hear people going to jail for Twitter comments, right? So I mean, Germany's doing the same thing. When Elon Musk bought Twitter, I was like, what the hell is he doing? And now I'm like, at least you have a place that you feel comfortable saying something. I don't necessarily think it's all wonderful stuff that's being said on Twitter, but the fact that you can now say something that someone might disagree with and not get in trouble for it, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's a platform.
Interesting. So I got countries with protections for free speech are United States, Canada, India, Japan, and South Africa. Interesting.
So which ones of those are impacted by the British? UK, that would be Canada,
Canada,
right?
Australia.
US,
US.
India,
Okay.
Australia.
Yeah.
All those would be impacted by the British rule. And then
Yes.
Japan would be impacted by American rule because MacArthur wrote the Constitution.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you think about it, all free speech in the world seems to derive directly from British rule.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing they should be proud of.
I would think so. I would take that as a positive.
Yeah. No, I mean, you can't say you can't criticize government in most places.
Yes.
Yeah, you definitely can't. I know I went to Cuba a long time ago. Cuba's an interesting place.
You went to Cuba? Really?
Yeah, yeah.
For work?
No, I just for fun.
Wow.
Fun.
Okay.
So
Did you have to get there through like South America or something?
I went from LA to Havana, direct flight.
Wow.
Really?
So this is what people don't know is I went on a cross-cultural exchange program.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And at that time, I think about 250,000 Americans per year were going. But the point is, Cuba is really interesting. It's got two economies. Well, it had when I went, like over 20 years ago. It has basically, if you're an American or you're on the dollar economy, you're living a good life, right? If you're on the peso economy, you're screwed, basically. You're screwed. So I went on the dollar thing. It was so much fun. And but let me tell you something. A lot of the people, because they had pictures of their leaders up all over the place, and they're like, "Yeah, you don't want to say anything negative about any of these dudes." Or in fact, I think it was one guy, Castro at the time, and they said otherwise you'll just disappear.
It's like the old Soviet bloc. Yeah.
It's the absolute power thing, right? These people all started their revolutions with grand ideas in mind.
Yeah, right.
But once you're in power, you think your ideas are the ones that need to be, and if you're not open to other opinions and no one can check you on it because no one's more powerful than you. I mean, this is what we see with almost every dictator.
Yeah.
I think Singapore is they're not dictator, but it's like one ruler has full power.
I've been there
right?
twice. It's nice.
Oh, yeah, nice. But one ruler has full power, and I think it's always the example of the most effective form of government is like a benevolent dictatorship. I think people point to Singapore because they can get things done like that. Boom.
Yeah. Which is interesting because Trump's trying to see just how much he can get done by decree.
Mm-hmm.
And he's getting more done than I thought he'd be able to get done. I thought there'd be more pushback, but who knows?
Well, you got to wait for some of the court cases to go through and see what happens with some of them, and see what he says. All this stuff, but some of it's in limbo. Let's see where it settles out.
Yeah, it's sort of definitely fascinating, actually.
Yeah, there's changes need to be made. It's how we accomplish them.
Yeah.
The sheer amount of energy that his cabinet has.
Yeah.
The watching them talk, like who's the press secretary?
What's her name? She is like a firecracker.
I mean, she's a bam, bam, bam. I'm watching like, wow. I don't think I've seen any press secretary, and I've been impressed with most of the press secretaries being bright. They got to be bright to do that job, right? Yeah. But no, she and who's the attorney general? The woman who's the attorney general?
I don't know.
When she gave her speech or whatever her first speech, I'm listening going, she's aggressive and attacking and saying we're not going to put up with this, and it was not a nice guy speech at all. I'm like, oh wow.
No, these especially the men. She's an assassin, not the one you're talking about, but the press secretary. I mean, she is.
Oh yeah.
Boom.
Oh, and she's going this. I'm not going to talk about it, and she just is outright open about it. And then is it Hegseth? Is that the guy who's in charge of the military?
Yes.
Yeah. And he started talking about was it being more warrior mentality or whatever, all that kind of stuff, and I'm like, wow. I'm like, well, can you say that today? It is military. It makes perfect sense.
And then
but I'm like, it was just, it was like all of them are channeling the cutting through the fluff that has been in part of politics for so long.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because politics has built its own little language, its own little culture, its own little way of dealing with things, to where you can't tell a politician from the rest you can't tell them apart. They're all the same, and they're nothing like the average person.
Yeah.
Right. The way they are, and they're different species in essence. And suddenly you brought in people who don't act that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that I just find it interesting. I'm a little worried about all of them, but I'd probably be
And
worried if it was the other way too, if the other side had won. So
and all this energy and the bombasticness that they come out with, let's see how long that lasts, because that's hardly sustainable over a long period of time.
because they're working every day. They're not
Oh,
doing
yeah.
a regular
Yeah,
work
they're
week.
working.
So
They're
if that's
working
the case,
18, 20 hours a
yeah,
day to start, and that's typical of any new
it's
changeover in
100
any
days, right? You
company.
get 100 days to do
Yeah.
things. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But I mean, if he can start delivering bigger and bigger chunks of savings, I mean, I was going through this in my mind. So a lot of people said that U.S. aid was actually helping to pay for a lot of the covert stuff too, right? That the government does, like the CIA and the like. So I'm like, gosh, I went through this thought exercise. So there's this book by Philip K. Dick who wrote the Blade Runner books, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And he has this president who gets elected in this book, and he's a communist. He's actually paid for by the communists, and so he does his best to basically destroy America at the time. And it was said in the 1980s. I think it was written in the 1960s. So it was kind of funny to listen to. And I'm like, all right, so let me take a look at why was U.S. aid the one chosen. So I'm going to take the conspiracy theorist approach that he's actually a Russian shill who wants to destroy America. Well, if it's the CIA, if it's truly the funding for the CIA comes through this, and the only thing fighting the war today, because we're not in a military war with Russia, is the CIA, is our intelligence services, then this would be a way to dismantle our ability to influence people around the world. So that would fit that conspiracy theory that he's trying to destroy America by taking away our offensive capability. And then I said, okay, but what is the more reasonable reason why something like that? Well, it's small. It's only $50 billion compared to $6.8 trillion, right? It is mostly money going to non-Americans. So most of us are probably not going to be overly offended if you cut the money.
Yep.
And so it's an easy win from that aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they make a mistake, it's probably not going to be that big a deal because, again, it's not going to Americans. So when you figure all that out, you're like, well, it's also a logical choice from that perspective. And they also knew that if there was stuff that was being hidden in there, it would be described in ways that it sounded funny and that they could just cut. So it was to me, it's the low hanging fruit idea is really what comes through. But I just did this our thought process. So I've got now these two theories. Why was USA chosen? Because he's out to destroy America or he's out to save America. And then what do? I have to assign a value of what I think is likely. And I said, well, okay, I'm not going to totally rule it out. I'm too much a scientist to say 100% one way or the other. So maybe it's 3% that he's actually trying to ruin America. But that leaves me with 97% thinking that he's not, in which case I'm going to go for the moment with the one that's the bigger number and say, oh, I think he's actually trying to help America get a balanced budget. And I reserve judgment on this other thing back here. And if it turns out it was this, then at least I had thought it through, right? This is the way my mind works when I'm trying to figure out scenarios of what's reality, what's the likelihood. And I don't know information. I'm not talking to these people. I don't have direct access to the president to know what he's thinking. But with the information I have, with my understanding of how the world works, with my experience, I think it's more than likely they chose it because it was low-hanging fruit and they could sell it to Americans easily.
And I would take the role of like a magician. Look at what I'm doing over here when everything really over on my other hand is what I really want to do, and you're not paying attention.
Yeah, that's called controlling the news cycle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Scott and I talked about this. I think the way he communicates now is totally different than the way he communicated
he's very different.
the last time. I really feel like
yes.
he's less defensive. Because it's like because
he's done. He's got his
won.
4 years.
What do I need to be defensive about, right?
It doesn't matter anymore. Yeah.
But also, I was listening to him talk. He still throws his little quips in.
Yeah.
But he's so good at the quips.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to be quite as attack oriented as before. He goes, there's just little things that he says, but they don't seem quite as directly aggressive as they were before.
Most people won't perceive it that way, but I think the higher educated, the more perceptive person will see those little nuances more clearly.
I think part of it is he wants to talk. He doesn't like silence.
Yeah.
No.
So he's not going to say something and then be quiet for a moment and say the next thing. So he fills that little silence, and instead of using a filler word like we do in Toastmasters, he makes a little jibe at somebody in there.
We have guys ringing the bell. Ding, ding, ding.
He's doing an incredible job. Maybe not perfect, but an incredible job. I mean, he didn't need to say maybe not perfect, right? But he did.
Well, I did think it's so funny because I saw him talking to some guy from France, I think the president of France, and they were talking about funding NATO or whatever.
Yeah.
And Trump's like, yeah, he's giving it like, that's not so good. It's just like the guy, I mean, a politician is not supposed to do that, but
no, but
the different animal.
The fact that the filter on him is so much less than everything else. The fact that he's given hours and hours of access to the press for us to see.
Oh my God.
All of that is buying so much goodwill to people who are sick of what we've been living through.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I think the next election cycle is going to be extremely interesting because you don't have a sitting president that can run.
We'll see what happens with that.
Yeah. Let's see I'm interested to see who comes out of the woodwork and is going to run.
Yeah. Well, I think
you've got
the California guy, he's already getting that stuff. He's doing a podcast.
Oh, he doesn't have a chance.
No.
California will vote for him. He'll get the 5 million votes in California. That's not the problem.
Yeah.
But I think what you're engaging good to your point or not, depending on what side of politics you're at. I think it's engaging to all the 18 to 21-year-olds that did not vote in this cycle that will be available to vote in the next cycle that may make a difference.
If he can get in ahead of if he can put himself in a powerful position within the Democratic Party to actually help them shape their image, and they're willing to understand that they lost and why they lost, then they have a chance of rebuilding into with a message that might get appeal to those people. But right now, it feels like they're still stuck in we didn't really lose.
Yeah. Well, you gotta go lick your wounds and figure it out for a few months. You're only, 4 months away from the election, so it's going to take a while.
Yeah.
The midterms are going to tell you.
They need to show the midterm. They need to win some in the midterms.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Right? They need to take back control. I don't care really, but if they want to continue to be a factor, they need to take back control of one of the.
Yes, agreed.
And that'll happen in midterms. It'll probably happen.
Interesting.
Always the ball swings, right?
Yeah,
too far left. Now it's swinging back, and then it's going to swing back again. Hopefully come back to the center sometime.
I think you need some new people in the 40 to 55 range that will come out as leaders.
Yeah.
Of all this, I think you need new people.
One of the things I say that often pisses people off about the Supreme Court, right? Because Trump had 3 people he appointed to the Supreme Court last time, and I'm like, you can blame Ruth Bader Ginsburg for waiting too long. Right? She died in office under him, so he got to choose her replacement. He got to replace a Democrat with a Republican, and I'm like, she should have said when Obama was out, I'm going to give you the choice. I'm gonna retire and let you select. If that's really what the fear was, and the fact that she didn't, she wanted to be the one in there, is like, that to me is selfish beyond belief. And that's what I see with our really, really old politicians, is they're just selfish. They think no one else can do what they do.
Yeah.
I'm from an era where we fought for blank, blank, and blank, so only I can do it. No, well, then train the next group to do it and bring them in, so you don't die in office with a problem where the whoever's in power gets to replace you.
Well, there's so much money involved in it, right? It's amazing. These guys will come in, they'll be making their $200,000 a year, and they leave 4 years later worth $50 million. And you're like, where did that come from?
And go into a $2 million salary consultant.
Yeah. Exactly.
So all that needs, if it were worth it, I mean, going off and giving speeches, when they do the speaking tour, I kind of get the speech thing, but when they just go become a consultant for a company, you're just becoming it's lobbyists, and that means that money either after the fact or before you even got there changed hands in such a way that it made it worthwhile to hire you.
Yes,
of course. Hey, I wonder if we shouldn't wrap this up, because Mike, I can barely see you. You're like just
sitting in the dark.
That ain't better.
Not much, but
I don't have.
You look like you're in an interrogation room, actually. Like there's this torture device behind your head, and
where were you last Wednesday at 11 o'clock? Okay, so do we have anything else, or can we wrap this up? Because I'm getting kind of hungry now. Or
I'm good.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that. We don't need to talk about that. I've been trying to come up with. I want to talk about supernatural versus non-supernatural at some point. Not now, but that's something I want to
Okay,
talk
yeah,
about.
sounds good. Supernatural versus.
Yes, I want to say it was a pleasure to meet you. I've enjoyed the conversation. Scott and I have had several discussions like this. We sit at the diner and 15 minutes turns into an hour. It's fun talking to smart, intelligent people that are not afraid for opposing viewpoints so that you can do some thinking.
Yeah.
That really engages me, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
We're
much.
glad you're on, actually. And then there's a Sarah there who's like, I don't know what her position is exactly, but she's freaking smart as a tack, actually. I'd like to have her
She's
on.
just a waitress, believe it or not. She does not want to be a manager. Her dad's one of the managers. But yeah, she's only 27, but she is extremely intelligent.
Yeah, she'd be
Yeah,
fun to
that'd be
have
cool.
on.
That would be cool. Yeah.
That'd be cool.
I met someone yesterday who was an AI consultant at one of these mixers that I went to, and thought that might be an interesting person to talk to as well. So
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be
Yep.
awesome. And the cool thing is, as soon as we start getting a little more reach, I mean, we're gonna have more availability of guests. So I took like I'll leave it with this, and then maybe we can cancel. But I took like this $10,000 media class, and basically how to get on TV and news and everything like that. And their big thing was media gets media. So the more you are, it's like the more you can show clips, and the more numbers you have. They're like, yeah, come on, right? Because
yeah,
you're in the system at some point.
the
And
one
tell
guy.
Shelly, I'm sorry. Tell Shelly thank her
Okay, I
for
will.
her contributions. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Pretty
Yeah.
cool. All right, so can we wrap this podcast up?
Yep.
And it's
Go for
February
it.
28th, 2025 for anybody who wants to know. All right, we'll see you guys later. Chris, see you. Mike, thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Have a good weekend, guys.
Yeah,
Alrighty.
happy Friday.
Bye-bye.